starting from making Excel templates better to what I'm doing now, it's just about process improvement. Our software is the Ferrari and you have the Civic. How do we actually drive meaningful transformation and planning? You might get some resistance early, but for longer term success, you need to kind of build these teams.
So, welcome, dear listeners, to another exciting episode of the Thought Resonant Show. Today, we have with us Dan. Dan is a powerhouse in customer success and enterprise planning. With a proven track record leading multi-million-dollar SaaS portfolios, driving enterprise transformations, and advising Fortune 500 executives, Dan brings deep expertise in aligning tech with business goals, revitalizing accounts and building centers of excellence that scale impact. Let's dive in how he helps organizations unlock measurable value and long-term strategic growth. So welcome Dan to our show.
Sure, no, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So first of all, very excited to know about how your journey got started into the world of entrepreneurship and what eventually led you to the world of coaching.
Yeah, so I started my journey as an end user of planning systems in finance. And so I naturally have, I guess, I gravitate towards tech and the tools used in the job. And so just being there, I started to work on making things better and, whatever tools we had. So make these Hyperion templates better. And over time, I did more and more of that kind of work in the team to the point where I started building applications to then impact broader people. So things I started working on were just for me, my team. Then I started working on things for the finance team, and as I progressed, I took over a smaller sort of footprint for sort of sourcing department, which oversaw even more users, 400 people across 7 countries, and then worked in consulting. Just as I progressed to driving larger transformations across customers to the point where I worked with Anaplan driving transformations. It just was starting from that one impetus of like making Excel templates better to what I'm doing now. It's just about process improvement, making tech better utilized in people's lives. And the further I got from, the more I moved in this direction, the more impactful you can be. So it's kind of a natural progression of, hey, I went from making better Excel templates by, hey, I can make VBA to make this better, to all right, how do we actually drive meaningful transformation and planning tool? So it was kind of a stepwise natural progression there.
Got it. Awesome. So, what's your approach to build long-term customer relationships, especially in high-pressure enterprise environments?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Just generally, even within orgs. But for me, I think you need to, first you need to kind of create relationships.
Okay.
It's funny how much communication and relationships play in software. I think people don't realize that. They think, maybe it's more about other pieces or how fast their tool is. But for me, you have to create trust by providing value and
Okay.
being empathetic. So, I'm there as a point of consistency, insight, and calm. Being as much data driven as possible really helps maintain relationships, especially when you're in a situation like I've been in the last few years, especially is that where I don't work directly at these companies. You're there as a trusted advisor, and you need to kind of come with data driven and non-emotional sort of decisions. And so for me, that's engaging across the org, often engaging execs all the way down to director level or even hands on keyboard, depending on the thing, is knowing where their pulse is. And so that way, when you can speak with authority and empathy, and they really do trust your where you're coming from, and you really kind of need that level of engagement to really understand what issues they're facing. Anyways, at the end of the day, it's more about delivering strategic. Then once you have that, you can then understand strategy and deliver more tailored strategic vision, not just boilerplate stuff. When you then are able to deliver strategic value, not just be, thought of as a support function for them, that's for me, how you maintain long-term relationships. They need to see you not as, like a vendor, but they see you as somebody who's a thought leader or partner with them. They ask for your advice.
Exactly.
You want to be at that level. And if you stay at that level, I think that's when you can be most successful, most impactful. And actually, it's symbiotic, right? It helps us both ways. You knows for you to know how to help them and for them to tell you how to help and for you to help them. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Got it. So now moving forward for you, how do you balance the technical side of SaaS optimization with the human element of customer success?
Yeah, this is, as I just mentioned, right? Like how much people play in software is undersold. I think a lot of times too, companies who people don't deal with software that often if that's not their day job. And I think they undersell how important people are in it. Part of it is having software that can deliver right. And I think when software companies sometimes talk about their solutions, they'll talk about features. Our software is the Ferrari and you have the Civic. And then so they try to talk you up in terms of, performance or certain metrics. And then the other side, they just make their current process easier to do. And so it's sometimes they're speaking different languages, but then also, how do you bridge that comms gap, but then also longer term? So there's a few different pieces of it. So first, you kind of have to be able to translate instead of it just being a feature discussion. You talk about outcomes and how do you, what kind of outcomes are you trying to drive? And how is this going to make certain people's lives easier? So for the execs, it's how does it drive better decision making and how does it drive value? All the way down to the hands-on keyboard folks. How does this make my day-to-day life better? So you have to understand that going in and have a real point of view on it, and then be able to reiterate that back to the right folks. And then, so then to the point of having to adopt the new system and tool, it feels very natural. They're thinking less about the tool itself. They're thinking about how, hey, this is going to make this part of my job easier. I'm going to be able to do this better. And then up the chain, they'll be able to then make better decisions. They'll understand that this is driving, quicker value, or value through maybe quicker response times or different ways of looking at things. And so I think that it really comes down to, like I said, speaking in outcomes, understanding folks, and being able to articulate that back to them. And yeah, I think it's still one of the trickiest things. It's a very tough skill. Usually people are really good at technology or they're really good in a functional area. And they don't talk both sides. So I think it's definitely something that is unique, but you got to approach it from that point of view and really understand where everybody's coming from.
Got it. So, would you like to share a moment where enterprise planning or agile implementation significantly shifted the trajectory of a business initiative?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that I could think about on this one, right? But one example was, I'm not sure if I can use their name, but they're a well-known technology company, sort of a EDW, a company that was a little more been pre-IPO for a while, but are pretty big. They've been IPO watch for a few years. And so I was working with them and recognized when I inherited them, they were already kind of semi-established. And for me, the customer success initiative was to bring things together. They were very much scrappy. It was a tech org, right? So it was very scrappy startup mentality. And that got them pretty far. It got them to where they were. So people just started grabbing things, getting stuff done. And so there weren't a lot of governance. There wasn't a lot of communications across teams, at least at the layer level that needed to be successful. And so for me, so much of customer success is enabling a couple of things, right? You want to be able to have dynamic systems. To me, that's still one of the biggest issues is systems are not, especially planning systems, are not dynamic. They need to live and breathe. I think something to call out, right? Planning systems or any kind of technology, a lot of times it can just break because it's old. It's not even anything changed, because your business process is changing. especially with a tech company that's growing very quickly, something that was built 2 years ago, they don't even work the same way anymore. So one is
Exactly.
dynamism, right? You need to have that, right? Yeah. And scalability. So you need to be able to scale. And these are things that usually when you sit down to get stuff done or early and you're it up through, you don't think about either of those things. You don't think about dynamism or scalability. You just want to get it done. That's why a lot of people use things like Excel right out of the gate. It's because you can get stuff done quickly. But the problem is it's not dynamic and it doesn't scale. And you can get pretty far that way. But then when you're talking about this company who's pre-IPO, trying to grow, how do you do that? When you have all these disparate tools, people spread out all over the org doing things differently. So I recognized that. I worked with them to bring in a center of excellence or COE lead. They had a lot of talent, but they didn't really have leadership. And so they had people in finance, they had people in customer success, they had people in sales ops. Well, actually, they didn't have people. They had one person in sales ops. So they were hiring up sort of tech folks in sales ops.
Okay.
It was more, how do we start to bring this together? So I worked with them to put in, governance and a structure for the center of excellence. And then we worked with them on a strategy of not just intake of enhancements and how to build things and make them dynamic over time, but then what is their longer term strategy and what makes sense for them, right? And this is going to be different for everyone. In their case, it made sense to have this sort of one team that had some governance over things so that they could be, kind of helps you deal with scalability, right? You need some sort of governance, right? So these are to deal with who owns certain metadata items and then who, hierarchies and definitions of things. And then over time, are we going to then bring these teams together as they grow and does it make sense? So that's kind of what we did. We decided that they were going to have one centralized team with some governance and then have different functional areas underneath it. And then over time, they would come more together as they became mature. And so it definitely enabled them to be quicker and it really put them in a position. So as they IPO, they have the right controls in place to track all these decisions they're making centrally, but also kind of have a sense of ownership. And then as they IPO, they will probably grow even faster, and they'll be in a position to then more quickly layer in new pieces. So expand into having more strategic workforce planning type, or have a look at their marketing performance and things like that. Being able to enable that quickly was what I did. So yeah, I definitely helped get that stood up for them, it setting them up for success. And it also was a symbiotic win because then they continued to expand with the platform I was working on. So they were getting more value. And so it was then, a contract expansion on our side, but really the focus is on enabling them to have a dynamic, scalable tool that can continue to grow and give them value. But you had to kind of go in there and understand where they were, give them the right advice on the structure that would make sense for them. And so that was something that I did. I worked with them directly, brought in some folks from my side to drive some conversations. But generally, that's, I had to come in, I had to meet, bring these people together who, again, they hadn't met before. Some of these people I hadn't even met before I got involved. And then now they're a team and they're meeting on their own. They have an idea of the structure and I'm sure they're going to go far.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a great story ahead. Yeah. Moving forward, I would like to know you have led agile teams. So, how do you ensure cross-functional alignment and motivation across complex multi-team structures?
Yeah, this is a good segue right from my last one. I think this is tough. So you need to, again, be seen as an authority. A lot of that is relationship building going in there, and also just really empathetically listening and understanding, and then also having shared experiences. But I think what you need to do is understand sort of the shared values, like how these teams working together cross-functionally will have shared benefits, but also individually what each team is trying to get and the differences and where they're at. Sometimes it doesn't, when you're talking about cross-functional alignment, I've been with folks where it's like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to even have this team engaged because of where they're at. They might be small. They had layoffs. They have maybe one or two people. So they can continue to do what they're doing. We will maintain a relationship with them, but maybe they don't need to be kind of brought in. So I think you have to understand where each team's at and how they're driving value. And then also what the broader strategic initiatives are for the company. And so that's kind of a given. And then I think, building out centers of excellence, I use that as a term of art. There's a lot of other words for it. I think that's the one I've been using for a while now. But yeah, center of excellence, which is basically just a group of people within, if we're going to talk about planning, they would be, you might have a planning officer, and then that would include subject matter experts in the functional areas, sort of executive sponsors, tech team, basically anybody who touches the components, either from the hands-on keyboard builders all the way to the leadership who then read the reports. And then, there's a lot of different ways of structuring a COE, but building out COEs with the right kind of structure, right? If you only have one functional area, it might be simple. If you have multiple functional areas, so let's say you have sales and finance, how are you going to work together? In my last example, the team had both. And so since they were younger and growing and their sales footprint was pretty small, it was 2 people, and they were about to add another kind of build, what we decided was it doesn't make sense to bring everybody together right now in a sort of centralized team. Maybe they stay on their side or have federated ownership of their models with centralized governance. So you can have these trade-offs when you have a cross-functional alignment of how do you federate different components of it. Is it all centralized completely in a tech org and they have to deliver everything? Or do you have federated ownership of different pieces? And that will also depend on the company itself. But basically having this conversation and creating this internally is one way to also help drive that alignment, right? Even if the teams stay separate, federated, like I was saying, it's still another way to drive there. Hold on, my cat is clawing this box. Let me get her out of here. I can't hear.
Okay.
Sorry about that. She just decided to start clawing it in the middle of my answer. So centers of excellence. So what that does is you might get some resistance early, but to longer term success, you need to kind of build these teams. And it's not easy, but you need to have also literally you have to have somebody to do it. A lot of times, I don't even know how many, when I'm doing this work, I've met with folks and in let's just sales and finance, those were the examples I was using. They hadn't met with each other ever. Like I would be the first person to bring them together, and they work at the same company. So at some level, you also just need a facilitator, right? And companies don't even do that themselves generally. I've been physically at buildings where I'm like meeting with one team, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go meet with the other team. You want to go meet with them? And they said, I don't know. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm the one to do it, but sometimes there's just not somebody there. People don't think about this, right? They don't have a facilitator. But yeah, basically, that's one of the values of some customer success is to go in there or consultant or whatever it is and be that person to drive it together. So when you're talking about cross-functional alignment, is a structured something that has to be thought about and effort has to be put into it. It cannot be. It just doesn't happen organically. And either you bring in do it internally with somebody that they've been charged with that. You bring in a consultant or you work with somebody like customer success like I did and drive it. Otherwise, I haven't seen it really work any other way because everybody's just going to focus on their own functional area. Finances, like they should, right? Finance is going to focus on finance and sales is just going to focus on sales. I mean, there's going to be some cross data pollination of data, but really not going to drive cross-functional collaboration to that level. At least it's not very common.
Awesome. So now moving forward, I'd like to know how do you keep yourself updated with the emerging trends and breakthroughs going on in the industry?
This is a tough one. As much as possible, there's things like LinkedIn. I talk to folks about in the industry about what they're seeing and get their point of view. I think another way is when Gartner comes out with their ratings, I read the Gartner reports, and then sometimes it's just good to have another perspective. So I'm reading it just to hear how they describe these solutions, and if they say that Anaplan is the leader, visionary, or Verisent on sales is pushing, then I want to hear why they're saying that. And then I go dig and see what potentially new offerings or what are they doing differently than they were before. It's actually once you're into it, it's actually kind of easy to then just layer in what companies are doing as their initiatives. So you can then look and see, hey, what are they doing differently now? Yeah, obviously the big ones being things like AI integration and bespoke kind of models, right? So AI ML integration across the board. So AI sort of LLM to look at models and then answer plain English kind of questions that usually an exec would give to a person on their team. So, hey, what was the biggest seller in Q2 and whatever region? And then a follow-up question on that, right? So those kinds of things can get offloaded to AI when you have a closed system. It's actually easy, and that's a bigger trend. And then bespoke kind of out of the box functionality is bigger. There's been back and forth and sort of trends in enterprise planning, but the idea is people just want most of the work. They're so used to apps in their day life, and they're used to AIs. They just want at least the starting point to be there. And so, where do we have a good starting point we can iterate on very quickly. So I think those are just a couple of the trends. And so, yeah, it's LinkedIn, networking, events. I still attend some events, uh, here and there. And if I don't attend them, you can watch the keynotes a lot of times. And I'll watch the keynotes at like double speed, because they'll be long sometimes, or as fast as I can, where I still understand what they're saying. Just because I can really get there's a lot out there.
Awesome. So, since you have worked with Fortune 500 companies, what are some common traits you notice, common traits or common patterns of companies that successfully scale customer success?
Oh, customer success, like as them internally or like working with a customer success team?
Working with a customer success team.
Okay, yeah. So with customers that are like working with customer success, let's say enterprise that is transforming, the most successful companies I've seen have exec buy-in, right? From the beginning. That's before the beginning. So that's important.
Okay.
You need leadership, and that has to stay there, right? That can obviously, if that changes at any point, it can really derail things. So having executive sponsorship is major. And so for a few reasons, right? So you need their sponsorship, not just because they're paying for it, but they're the ones that actually care about value. If you go up and down the chain, um, the top is going to care about the value, and then there's like the people in the middle care about maybe process improvement, but then the people on the hands bottom, the actual individual contributor level, they care about their, how does this make my life better? I got to use this thing. And so if you lose the top, it's really hard to get the rest. But also the sponsorship helps with internal branding and ensuring the success. So when you have execs say, hey, and you can work with them on this, but a lot of times they have this messaging. So they understand the value. So they'll tell, let's say it's at the CEO level or VP, and then they go down to like the VP level or director level, and they'll tell them why it's important. Then what you do is you have those people on board. Because if you don't get the middle layers on board, things aren't very successful a lot of times. People just they don't put a lot of effort into it. They won't show up. They won't take it seriously. And what you'll end up doing is you won't get transformation. You probably won't even build something that people will like, because that will then just trickle down. So you need to get the layers below the C-suite and sort of executive level bought in, and then they translate that down, and then they show up. They're active. They understand what this is doing, and then you actually get a lot of times where you drive a lot of your requirements is down at the level of the individual contributor, and they're the most detached from the leadership. So you need to have that buy-in all the way down, and then it needs to go all the way back up. And so for me, it's upfront having that. Hey, look, understanding where everybody's coming from at every level, but this is our thing. So if we're working, this is going to happen, right? This is why. This is what the upside is, and then when you have it all the way up and down the org like that, people will show up actively. They'll make a priority. They won't just put it off. And when you do have executive buy-in up and down, you're able to then, these people have day jobs, let's say, right? And you're trying to do a finance transformation, but if they're busy, this is going to not be a priority for them. So what you can do is, and especially if you have exec buy-in, you say, okay, now this is a priority then. Put this stuff on hold. We need to do this. And if you don't have, again, that prioritization, they show up to sessions, requirement sessions, or whatever it is, and they're not ready. They don't care, or they're just like busy or distracted, right? So I think those are the big ones for the initial sort of rollout of systems and tools. And then ongoing, as I mentioned, building out and treating these systems as living and breathing by instituting and bringing in folks to own it longer term and to iterate over time. And not maybe just enhancements, but a longer term strategic partnership with an internal center of excellence to then iterate on tiny systems and tools. Because, for a long transformation, you're going to be iterating on the early models while you're still building out the next ones. And so if you're just relying on completely third party people, it'll make it very expensive, but it also won't be as good as if you have dedicated folks internally. So yeah, I think those are some big ones. And then I guess the other last one, which is maybe more is tactical, is that, when you're doing an enterprise transformation, scaling up internally, you don't want to just lift and shift. Take it as an opportunity to rethink your process. So many people are just trying. It's a little bit human nature, but they try to lift and shift. They try to take an existing thing and rebuild it in the new tool and to marginally make it better. But really, it should be seen as an opportunity to improve. And maybe you don't do it in the first iteration, we do in subsequent iterations, but the idea is use this as an opportunity to improve your processes and iterate on them. And that really, I think, comes more into place too if you have the right level of engagement. Obviously, the execs aren't necessarily going to be the ones driving that. It's going to be a lot of times the hand on the keyboard folks. That's why you kind of also need alignment. You get them excited, then they'll rethink and work with you on how to re-envision their existing processes.
Awesome. So now then at this point for my audience listening to the podcast, resonating with you and might want to reconnect with in future, would you like to share some of the best ways of reaching out to you? Like if you're willing to share a website, email ID, anything relevant?
Yeah, I would say, I'm on LinkedIn. That's an easy way to get a hold of me. LinkedIn.com/in/dandoc, my name. And then my email address is dandoc@gmail.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your contact details with my audience, and I hope some real connections are built out of here.
Sure.
Moving towards the last and final question of our conversation today. What are some final thoughts or closing reflections for our audience?
Yeah, I think, when we're talking about transformation, right, in software, enterprise level, it's been a theme, but, so much of it is about people and relationships and motivation. Table stakes is the software and the functionality of it. But really, the success comes in understanding what you're working towards, empathetically working with the right people at the right time, and then building a system and then make it dynamic. So for me, it's about, potentially, if you're moving into this, looking at this, start small, early wins, iterate, and then always have a plan for the path forward for things like adoption and change management. Even if you have everyone on board, you still have to plan for how these things are going to get rolled out. So sometimes that might be a function of who you use as implementation partner, but I think, you should have that in your brain, because then once you take ownership of it, becomes a muscle that you're able to then understand how do we drive change? How do we drive adoption? Basically when you're looking at enterprise transformation, the vision is important, but that's not where you win. You win with, building a trusted ecosystem and velocity and iteration. And so knowing that going in, you'll be way more successful than if you learn that after, which sometimes happens. So just knowing that building a structure and creating an environment to enable ongoing enhancements over time and scalability is really something you need to kind of have a mind for. But yeah, those are what I would say, the big ones. You don't
Awesome.
win enterprise transformation with vision. With vision, you build it. You win with velocity and trust.
Awesome. Great. So that are some great thought-provoking closing reflections to
Sure.
end our conversation today. And with that being said, we have came to the end of an awesome podcast. And thank you so much, Dan, for coming in and sharing a pool of knowledge with our audience today. And thank you so much for giving your valuable time and coming here. And it was really, really a great honor for me to host you today on our show.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. No, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you to my dear audience for listening to this podcast till the very end. Keep listening, Thought Resonance Show. Till then, it's your host Saurabh signing off. Bye, guys.